Welcome to a new video about my quick tips. Today we will take a look into the optional chaining. That's something that is already in JavaScript and you can use. The important thing about optional chaining is the problem that you can have objects that eventually could have properties that you're not pretty sure about. Here's an example of a user that have a name and an address, and in the address a street and a city. Now, it could be that you want to access the city of the user, but eventually you not has defined this data directly here, and you are not pretty sure about the object and the properties are existing. What you can now do is you can access the user and write a question mark, and this tells JavaScript to firstly check if the user exists, and only if this is the case it will go to the next property you are asking, and you can then again writing a question mark, and this tells then JavaScript. This also checks in JavaScript if the address are existing. And lastly, we will access the city. In the bottom one, you see a user that don't have any data. And the thing now here is that for that user, it could be the user, you are not totally sure about this. And if you're writing these question marks, what JavaScript will do is if the empty user not exists, in this case it exists, that's important, now it asks for the address. But in the object there's no address, and because we have written this question mark, JavaScript will end the process and returning undefined, as you can see here. And that's the kind of core functionality of optional chaining. You can write this question mark for properties you are not pretty sure if they are existing. And you will not run in any JavaScript error because of this. We also here have an example with a method call. Here we have a kind of object with a property or function add that gets an A and a B value and returning the sum of them. What we now can do is we can also use this for function calls. That means, for example, here we have the calculator and we firstly checking if this thing is existing or is it undefined or null. If it exists, we will checking if there is a property named add and writing this question mark to determine if the add function exists. And here it's important that you write a question mark and a dot, because you can't write a question mark and then the brackets. You have to write the question mark dot and then the function call. You see here this works all fine, it returns 5. For the next one here, we again want to access the calculator, but in this example we want to access a multiply function. Because this calculator don't have any multiply function, you again want to try if it exists, and if it exists, execute it. But as soon as the script reaching this point, it will return undefined because the multiply function not exists, but you will not get any JavaScript error. The third example is array access. We have here an array with 3 elements, which means we have index 0, 1, 2. So what we now could do is we can access it also based on this optional chaining by use question mark dot and then the index of the element. Here it's kind of not related with anything, but yeah, if you would like use an object that not exists, and you would use question mark dot and then the index 0, it will also return undefined, because the array or this question mark dot firstly checking if the element exists and then tries to access the element on index 0. If you're running this, you will see the outputs that already like get written out here. So then we will go in a more advanced optional chaining example. Here we have like an example with settings that containing a theme with an empty string, a volume with the number 0, and notifications initially with null. Now, because part of the optional chaining is also this double question mark. Most of the developers, I think, knowing the OR concatenation, if you're using it twice, you can also kind of get a nullish comparison. Here in that example, we're saying here settings.theme and make this double OR, and then saying here dark. What this does is it checking if the first part of this one is setted and if it kind of is a valid string or a valid number and so on. But here you see that the theme is like an empty string. With this approach here, you will lose this because an empty string also is in this kind of logic not valid. If you're using now this double question mark, an empty string will be a valid number. That means this double question mark only checking if the first argument or the left side of it is null or undefined, and that's it. If you have, for example, a 0, it also will catch this. Here we now get to the example with the 0. We have volumes settings.volume and then this double OR and then 100. And you can see again that if you're using this, the number null also is not a valid number. It's also nullish. The settings.value with the double question mark with the 100 in this kind of way using the 0 because it's not equal to null or undefined, and then the value on the left side get used. This can be used, for example, in different cases to like defining a default value if the function parameters, for example, not containing any value. Then we also will go here through an example, nested optional chaining, with here response, data, users, and in this users we have an array, and this we have a object with name and settings, and this one a theme. And in the last thing, it's more or less like more extreme. We kind of like showing how an array works with optional chaining, and also have this double question mark. We have a more complex object, and if any property of this list here is not defined, it will return the light as a string. If we run now the example, you see that it's like the same outputs then you can see in the top here. We now take a look on the real world examples. Here we have 3 examples. All of them are valid use cases. The first one is an API response handling. We have here an object that containing a status and data. And we kind of want to show here how it kind of behaves or how you should use it in real-world examples. We have here a default avatar. That means if the data of the API not returning any avatar, it will return this default image. And as you can see, we're checking if the returned data containing data, user, profile, and avatar. If any of these properties, or the last one, returning undefined or null, it will use the default avatar. And as you can see here, it returning the default. Now we go to a second one, event handling. If we have an event from a target and a value, we can here checking if the event has a target and if the target has a value. Otherwise, we're returning no input. And here you see that at the moment the value is an empty string. That means it's using the value that is contained in the event. We lastly checking out the feature flags. We have here a config with features and then determine like a dark mode and notifications. And here we then saying config.features.dark mode. That means if there are no properties or no features, it will return undefined, this whole expression, and then will fall back to false. Otherwise, if the dark mode is defined, it will use the false or dark of this value. At last, we will take a look onto the combined optional chaining and nullish coalescing. We have here an example that is an app, and we checking out the app user preferences theme. You can see here that you can also define like a different object with this double question mark if the first argument is not defined. And as you can see here, we're checking if the default user preferences theme, if there is a value, you see the preferences is null. That means this expression is undefined and it will look for app defaults theme and then using this theme. And here we have a function parameter with defaults. You can do this, of course. You can, for example, in this example, also think about like making 3 arguments in the function and defining default values for them, because that's like overall we heavy end user that we're getting. But you also can think about like a name, an age, and an email as an input, and then you can kind of directly determine the value of it. And here we're checking out the name. If it don't have a name, it returns anonymous. If we don't have an user or like an age, it will return undefined. And for the email the same. And overall it will if you're looking here, we're giving a name and an age, and you will see here like John 13 and no email provided. And in the last one where we don't give anything or only an object, it will return anonymous, age unknown, email not provided. I hope you kind of understood the whole optional chaining, and hope you liked the video and subscribed, and hopefully I see you in the next video.